Hey everybody, welcome back to Creekside Maples. I'm Tony. We're going to do another episode of Addicted to Milling. As you can see, it's winter time, so we're going to talk about some cold weather milling and some things that you can do to help alleviate some problems that could occur because it's so cold. Let's get right at it. All right, so the thing about where we live in Canada, yesterday morning was minus 27. You try to mill in minus 27, it's cold. Not only is it cold on your person, but it's also cold on your equipment. And so there's some things that I've discovered over a few years that actually help to kind of alleviate or head off any problems before they start. And so I'm just going to go through a little checklist on, honestly just show you what we do here, and it does help. So let's get at it and I'll show you some stuff here. The first thing, one of the best things, is you got to have a clear area to walk and to work in. You can't effectively mill lumber, especially in the cold temperatures, if you're slipping and sliding on ice and everything else. So we have our mill sitting on a concrete pad, and this works really good for us. We keep it cleaned off well. So that's, one of the big improvements that we've done over the years. Secondly is make sure you have your mill sitting on a good platform so it stays level. Now, speaking of level, here's the deal. Here in Canada, where we live, the frost goes down in the ground. We have these lovely things called frost heaves. Frost heaves move the ground one way or the other. And so your mill, it affects it. It may be level when it's warm temperatures, but in the middle of January, when you had a cold, cold winter already, that ground has heaved. And so it's going to put your mill out of the level unless you've got it covered well in a warmed area, undercover, whatever, where the frost can't get into the ground. I don't. Maybe next year I'll have a roof over this thing, but right now I have to understand that that frost is going to affect the level of my machine. If you're outside in a cold climate and you're finding out that your boards are not, coming off level and even, well, then you may want to check to see if the frost has affected, the level of your foundation for your mill. I check mine probably every couple of weeks during the real cold winter just to make sure that it doesn't get out of whack. And I'll run the whole gambit up one and down the other to make sure not only is it level lengthways, but side to side as well. And I'll also make sure that the head's level and all of that. So, there's something there that you'll want to do. Another thing that I've discovered is you want to keep your mill clean, especially in the wintertime, because when you're milling, things can warm up a bit. But then when you shut your mill down, you've got all this lovely sawdust all over the place. And if you don't clean that up, what happens is that'll freeze on your mill, on your slides, on your log bunks, it'll, on your rails, and then you've got to dig it out of there. I've found it's a whole lot easier just to get a blower, just like that, and just blow that stuff off of there when you're done milling. And then I do the same thing on my deck to keep it all nice and clean. There's nothing worse than trying to dig frozen sawdust that's got a little bit of water in it off of, your mill. Now if you don't care about that, that's up to you, but I do care about it. These things cost a lot of money, so I like keeping it in the best shape I can. The next thing I always do is obviously your mill head rides along these rails. And these rails can get a little bit of ice on them, a little buildup on them. And so what I always do, every time I mill, I check the top of my rail to make sure that there's no ice, there's no sawdust, there's nothing built up on there, because one little 1/8 of an inch of ice buildup on your rail, it'll throw out your whole cut. And again, if that don't matter to you, then that's fine, but it matters to me. I like my boards coming off my mill as close to perfectly matched on both ends as I can. So, you know, keep an eye on stuff like that. You know, what I always try to do as well is I always get some WD-40 and I spray all of these, you know, screws that keep my log stops in. I always check those. I spray them down. That makes sure that they don't freeze so much into place, because they can. On a cold day, you get a little bit of snow, a little bit of warmer day, a little bit of condensation, a little bit of snow melt, and then before long it freezes again. Then you've got an ice layer right down in those log stops, and then you got to use a hammer or whatever to, you know, to loosen them up and things like that. So just little things that I've found to do. Now let's go over here to the saw head itself. Now I've found that these saw heads, these motors work really well. They really do. You know, even in the cold weather, they start really nice and run good. Let's talk about the head itself for a little bit, and the blades and things like that. One thing I always do on my blade is I never shut my mill off and leave the blade under tension. You always want to take the tension off your blade when you're done milling. That makes it so that that blade doesn't take on that, or that round wheel inside here. It doesn't, you know, make it so it just warps to that round. It loosens it up, and then when you retighten it for your next day of milling, it'll go around those pulley wheels, drive wheels much better. With lube, now a lot of people ask me, what do you run for lube on your blade in the wintertime? What I use, I just get me some windshield washer fluid, the winter stuff, and this is good down to -40. And I put that in. I don't mix it, I just put it right in the way it is, out of the jug. And you can see in my tube right here, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's blue. See if I can take you over there to show you. So that tube has a blue tint to it. And the reason is because it's got this blue fluid in it. And that really works good. It doesn't freeze, and it keeps things lubed pretty good, you know, during the winter time. Always keep these blade guides cleaned out. They will get wet, they'll get sawdust, they'll get ice and snow, and then they'll harden in there, and that really ruins the guides on the back because they'll freeze up. So rather than turning, they're just running across the face of them, and the friction can wear them out. And so I always clean these out all the time to make sure they're good. I clean out my saw head in here so that the sawdust does not freeze and, you know, up in there. I keep my sawdust chute cleaned out good every day when I'm milling. When it comes to the motor itself, if you look right here on your filter, your air filter, you'll see it's got a snowflake here, it's got an arrow here, then on the other side it's got the sun. That is made to rotate, so that in the wintertime you want the snowflake lined up over top of this arrow here, so that the warm air from your exhaust can be pulled into your motor, and it keeps your motor running warmer and better. You know, that's so important to do that. Keep that air filter cleaned out as well. Some other things that I really pay close attention to is these rollers. Let me get this down here. You can see these rollers right here. They can fill up because they got little cleaners, it's just pieces of cable. But this down in that groove can get caked in there with some sawdust and some, you know, ice or snow. You want to always get a good wire brush, clean those out, keep them clean, because again, 1/8 of a buildup, or even you know, a 30-second even, or whatever, can throw that cut of lumber out. And I'm really fussy about keeping the lumber peeling off that log just as even as I can. These pieces right here, I try to keep them clean because they can get some buildup on them. So I make sure that I spray them down with some good WD-40 because WD-40 seems to do the best in the wintertime to keep things lubricated. At least it keeps the water dried up off of it. Another problem some folks have been having, let's go around here, show you this, is their throttle cable. Now the throttle cable is right here. You can see it. This is the spring, this is the cable, this is where it fits in. Then it goes up here, or mine does, the way I got mine running. And then it comes over here and comes down into the handle and the throttle. This can freeze up, this right here, inside this. The cable, as you know, runs freely inside this coating. What I do is I'll take it off at one end or the other, and I will spray WD-40 inside this tube so that my cable, this cable right here that runs inside this black tube, it doesn't freeze up. Because if you don't do something like that, I will guarantee you that that cable will freeze. Because what happens is that it's going back and forth there so much when you're milling that it warms up. It creates friction, heat. And then when you shut the mill off and it cools down, it begins to, you know, freeze up in there. And the reason I know this is because it happened to me. So now I keep that lubricated inside that sleeve. Little things like that are going to help you have a much better milling experience. I try not to leave, you know, too much water in my tank in the wintertime. This stuff is good down to -40, like I said, but I don't know, I guess I just don't fill it up full in the wintertime in case we get it. Last winter we had some temperatures -50 and -51. In that case, this stuff that goes down to -40 would not have, you know, kept it good. So I don't fill it up that much. Something else I do, I always, back here around the motor itself, I keep it blowed off, cleaned off, so that there's not an accumulation of frozen sawdust or anything like that. And so those are some things that I do to keep the mill running good in the wintertime. If your mill is inside, then you don't have to worry about any of these things. But mine is not yet. I do have the pad poured, and I plan on putting a shed over top of it here this year sometime. But right now, this is what I got to work with. And so I have to keep these things, you know, in my mind to do these things so it doesn't create issues for me. Another thing too I always do is right here on these, where your logs lay, on these bunks, they can build up pitch, ice can get built up on those. And so I always try to keep those really cleaned off good. You can use a wire brush. Something I use, I have a little, this is actually a dough cutter for cooking. I use this right here, and I can scrape these off really good. Keeps them cleaned up nice. I can clean up my, you know, my rails where the head goes up and down. I can also use this to get the sawdust off the lumber when I'm cutting it, because you don't want to, you know, your boards, when they come off your mill, you have a lot of sawdust. You want to get that sawdust off of that lumber, because if you don't, it'll freeze on there. It can cause mold, mildew, it holds moisture. So, you know, just take the time to get the sawdust off of each board or 2x6 or whatever you're cutting. You'll thank me for it later. Something else I do as well, I have a pair of vice grips. Everybody has vice grips. I don't want my mill head to go zooming down the rails. If the wind comes up, especially in the cold weather, it can come up and you can get some nasty winter storms. I just take a pair of vice grips and I just clamp them right on the edge of my rail, just like that. Now, I know what some of you are going to say, well, won't the teeth on the vice grips chew up the rail and make it rough? I'm not talking clamping it down so tight that you can't get it back off. I'm just saying just a little bit of friction, just to barely clamp the front of your vice grip on there, just like that, and then it holds on. It stops the head from traveling down the rail if the wind comes up. So those are just some things that I do. Somebody might have seen my drill. I took the crank off of there. I got tired of cranking it, so now I just use the drill on there for my lifting it and lowering it down, which works excellent. I'll put the new head on there for that Woodland Mills puts out some day when I can afford it, but right now it's not in the budget, but that works fine. Some of you that live in the warm temperatures, two season climates, all that sort of thing, you won't have to worry about any of this. So if you happen to take the time to watch this whole thing, thank you, good for you. But I know it doesn't apply, but thanks for watching anyway. And for those of us that do have to contend with all this cold weather up here in Canada and other points and places you may live, then these are just some things that I have found that really does help. If you're going to store your mill, put a little gas treatment in here if you're going to store it over the winter. Seafoam works great. That's a great product. Put some in there. That'll keep your motor and everything good throughout the winter time. That's if you're going to store it. If you're going to run it, get yourself some Gasline antifreeze, and just, you know, what I do is every time I fill my tank up, I take one capful and I put it in there with it. That just keeps all that condensation out of there. It you know, gets rid of any chance of ice or water getting in my carburetor or in the motor. It just little things that make the difference, so that your sawmill, it's an investment. These things cost a lot of money. And so if we take the time to do these things, then the mill will pay for itself and then some. I've got 316.5 hours on this mill. It's a great mill. It has worked wonderfully. It mills all the lumber we need for our home, all of our buildings, everything. It just works great. And I spend a lot of time making sure that all these things are done. Maintenance is so important. So good luck milling. I hope this helps somebody. I hope it gives you some ideas. It's just common sense stuff, but I wanted to share it with you. You guys have an awesome day. Have fun milling. When milling isn't fun anymore, you need to sell your mill, because milling is fun. But have fun, good luck, and we'll see you right back here at Creekside Maples Homestead. Thanks for watching, everybody. God bless you. Take care.